Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And today we are talking about Bigfoot. And I'm going to talk about some of my favorite Bigfoot movies and some of my favorite Bigfoot books. And this was all kind of inspired by the fact that I recently read a Bigfoot book, and that Bigfoot book is going to come into play right after Loomis gets off of me. Uh, and that Bigfoot book is actually going to come into play later on in the video, so I'm not going to talk about that now. To start off, though, we're going to go with movies, and I'm going to go 5-1. The thing about the movies in this list is I'm actually going to be only talking about movies from the 70s. That's because I must admit there's a little bit of a weakness in terms of my Bigfoot viewing as far as movies goes past this era, and I really am just very into the 70s as far as what they did with their Bigfoot material. Some of these movies are very bad, but you'll kind of get what I'm going for when I talk about it. And there are good modern day Bigfoot movies, and that would probably be a whole nother list in itself. But I just wanted to focus on the 70s because, I love the 70s. And you'll see that most of these movies came out right near the same time, and I think that's just fascinating. So if you don't know about why the 70s, especially for film, was huge in terms of Bigfoot, that would be because of the Patterson-Gimlin film that was released in 1967. And that is basically like people at Patterson and Gimlin were out in California. They supposedly got really good real Bigfoot footage. It's really only a few seconds long. It's not very long. I'm a skeptic towards it, but it is one of the most famous Bigfoot materials ever. It is the thing. And it kind of started this huge boom of just Bigfoot material everywhere. Every place, every movie, everywhere in the world was huge into Bigfoot. And it really got to its head in the 70s. So I'm going to go 5-1 as I talk about some of these movies. And you'll kind of get what I'm saying. So number 5 on my top 5 1970s Bigfoot movies is Sasquatch, The Legend of Bigfoot. A lot of these titles are going to sound very similar. This one is not a documentary. It is a mixture because a lot of this is clearly a whole bunch of dudes went out hiking in the woods and they brought along their camera and then just took a whole swath of like random nature footage, and then they tried to make a script and an idea about Bigfoot around that. And that's why I kind of love this. A lot of it is just 70s nature footage where they just kind of filmed it. This was all done in British Columbia, so it's just them going around British Columbia, Canada, and you just see a whole bunch of nature footage, and it's pretty great. Unfortunately, there is some violence against animals in this. There is, I believe, an actual mountain lion gets shot in this. And I don't know if that was set up. Like, that one's a little wishy-washy. And that's one of the big things. That's why it's at number 5 and not higher on the list. Because I do like a lot of the random nature footage in there. And it also kind of intercuts by a few very famous, quote-unquote, true Bigfoot stories recreated. And they actually do a pretty good job of recreating it. It's just a shame that it seems like actual wildlife got hurt during the making of this. So if you're at all sensitive to that, this one's probably not the one to go with, but that's kind of why it's at number 5 and not higher on this list. Number 4 is, if you know me, you know that this would happen, and this would be one of the things that I talk about, and that is YEEEEEETTTIII, the giant of the 20th century. Now, this is from 1977, and now this is prime Kongsploitation. And if you don't know what Kongsploitation is, essentially Kongsploitation, there were exploitation films that were kind of trying to rip off and ride the success of the original King Kong, but it really didn't hit its head as far as Kongsploitation went until the 1976 remake of King Kong. And a large thing about that is the rights were all up in the air, and there were at one point Gino De Laurentiis and Universal are both trying to make competing King Kong movies, And as such, because there's just a huge thing about the rights, and because all of these different companies are trying it out, everywhere around the world, there are huge swaths of very obscure, very weird elements of filmmaking. There is a South Korean one, Ape, which is very bad. There are a one done by the Shaw brothers, The Mighty Peking Man, and of course the one we're talking today is Yeti, the Giant of the 20th Century. Now this is an Italian-Canadian co-production, and this features them discovering a Yeti, and the Yeti then goes on a rampage in Toronto, Canada. And I think that this movie is so much fun. It's very goofy. It's very silly. Every time the main girl says Yeti, she goes, the Yeeti, the Yeeti. And as far as props go, there is a inflatable nipple in this. There's a giant inflatable nipple in this. I don't know why they made that. And it's very creepy, but it is very, very funny and fun and exciting. They do the actual Yeti rampage, I was surprised. There's some pretty good effect sequences in there. There's a scene where the Yeti is like, again, this is a giant Yeti, which is the one outlier. Most of these are like normal sized Yeti, which are still like, and Bigfoot and Sasquatch, but anyways. But there's like this big miniature where it's like carrying out an elevator, and it's like pulling all the wires and stuff, and it was a pretty intricate miniature, and I was like kind of impressed. And there were some really funny and inventive scenes in this. This movie's never boring, and if you're a fan of cheesy King Kong knockoffs, this one is the must see. Number 3, The Horror Express from 1972. Now this is you've got Christopher Lee in this, you've got Peter Cushing in this, you've got Telly Savalas in this, and this is a movie where there is a train that is carrying this newly discovered ancient hominoid, who ends up being kind of like a Bigfoot-esque creature, and as they're going on the train, it is kept in ice, and it defrosts, and it escapes and starts rampaging on this train. And it is such a blast. You got a great cast of characters in this. This one, I believe, is public domain, which is why you will see people kind of use clips of this in other works. But I think if you haven't seen it and you're a fan of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, Horror Express is a must-see. It is such a great time at the movies, and it's a very interesting and unique film in the Bigfoot landscape because, like I said, this takes place on a train, and I don't think there's any other Bigfoot movies that take place on a train. The final two movies, both from 1976, both are essentially the same movie, but I like the style of one more than the other. So this is In Search of Bigfoot, which is 1976, and my favorite, which is number 1, The Legend of Bigfoot, 1976. Now, these are both pseudo-documentaries. I think In Search of Bigfoot is more of just a routine documentary. It is very interesting. It's all about these people kind of trying to find Bigfoot. And again, I have just such a fondness for Bigfoot hunters in the 70s versus Bigfoot hunters now. Like, I don't like watching things like Monster Hunters or all those like terrible Discovery shows because I just don't find them charming at all. And like, these guys are all very charming, very goofy, very silly characters. And the In Search for Bigfoot is one of the best in terms of just a conventional, normal documentary. And my number 1, the Legend of Bigfoot. Now, if you've seen this movie, you'll probably be like, why is this your number 1? This movie is terrible. Yeah, it's kind of terrible, but it's like the perfect terrible. I find the main character in this such a hoot. He is such an over-the-top character, and there's so many moments of him just like looking to the sky, and he's like, the sky is red. It looks apocalyptic. And he just seems to think he's like the greatest hunter of all time. And it's so funny. And when they finally show the Bigfoot costume that they made for this, because this is way more of a pseudo documentary, because they recreate the Bigfoot footage. And the way that the Bigfoot in the Legend of Bigfoot walks is bar none the funniest thing I've ever seen, because it's like this beautiful scenic 70s landscapes, and then you just see the worst looking Bigfoot costume you've probably ever seen, and he's walking like he just took a dump in his pants. It's so bad. It is so bad, but it's also so great. And I have just a hoot watching this. I watched this one twice last year because I enjoyed this one so much. So yes, The Legend of Bigfoot is currently my number one. Now, honorable mention in the fact that I haven't seen it yet. The Legend of Boggy Creek is supposed to be one of the most famous Bigfoot mockumentaries ever made. And that's all about the Falk monster. So I definitely need to see that one. That is one that's going to be on my to-see list. And maybe I'll revisit this in the future once I finally watch that classic movie. Heading into the books category, I had a few honorable mentions, basically just because they're not solely involving Bigfoot. And Bigfoot sightings. So a lot of Linda S. Godfrey's work, I'm thinking like American Monsters and I Know What I Saw, and any of her other books that really kind of focus on just people's tales of them encountering cryptids are my favorite things to listen to. I always listen to them on audiobook and just relax, and it's just people telling their supposedly true stories about them encountering Bigfoot in this time period. And some of it's modern, some of it's in like the 70s and classic stuff, and I really find it compelling. I think Linda S. Godfrey really explored everything in a very fascinating way, and I just love the way that she kind of delivers the material that she gets and how she displays the stories that she's told. My last honorable mention is Chasing American Monsters by Jason Offutt. And that one, it deals with cryptid sightings in every single province. Not province, I'm Canadian. In every single state of the U.S. And that features a ton of Bigfoot stories, like a ton. But it's not solely focused on Bigfoot, so I didn't include it here. Books that I want to read and I haven't read yet. So Monster by Frank Peretti, which I actually own. I just haven't got to that yet. And I also really want to read The Mountain King by Rick Hatula. That's supposed to be a really fun tale as well. So now, let's get to the actual books. Quickly, when making this top 5 list, I realized I think I've really only read 5 Bigfoot books. So you're going to get the books I've read from worst to best. Snowman by Norman Bogner is definitely at the bottom, so that's number 5. I actually own this one. I don't know how much longer I'll own it for because I didn't love it. This one actually does feature in Paperbacks from Hell, if you have read that, and that is the Grady Hendrix books that kind of leads a lot of this stuff, and you'll feel one more from that book in here. But Snowman is not bad. It's very over the top. It's very silly. It is basically a ridiculously described Yeti. Has made it from Tibet to now it's rampaging in I believe it's a Californian ski lodge. And it is very goofy, very silly, very over the top. And it's a fun read. It's not a terrible book by any means, but it's not as good as some of the other books I'm going to talk about. Number 4, and I know you guys will probably be surprised, this is a modern book. This one came out in 2020, and that's Devolution by Max Brooks. I listened to this in audiobook form, and it's really good. It's a very good book. I think the audiobook format works best for it. It's a bit of a slower burn. It is not a super quick and super fast-paced book. It's basically these people there is a huge, I believe it's a volcano eruption, and there is a whole bunch of other natural disasters that happen that kind of leaves this small town of people cut off from the world. And all these ecological disasters that are happening disrupts the local environment, and the local environment has Bigfoots in it, Sasquatchians, the Squatches, and they all kind of converge on this town because this town has stuff that they want, and there's this big, huge battle of survival. And I thought that this was a very, very fun book. I do think that the audiobook is really probably the way to go to this. I mean, I didn't read it any other way, so maybe the book is good. I just was really impressed by the performances on the audiobook for this one. And yeah, this is really good. I enjoyed it. Max Brooks is an interesting writer. I don't love all of his stuff, but Devolution is definitely worth reading and is a good time. Number 3, Snow Beast by Peter Tremaine. This one is from 1983. This one is an interesting little book in that it is very much a slow burn, but this is all in Scotland. And it's who does not want to read a Scottish Yeti story? Like, it's very fun. It's very fun. I think for me, there's not a whole lot of Bigfoot action in this book, but I did enjoy all the characters so much that I didn't mind it. Some people say, I know Grady Hendrix did not include this in Paperback from Hell because his Goodreads did not. He gave it a very bad review. He did not like it. But I like this. I like Snow Beast. It's me. I'm Andrew, and I'm here to defend the book Snow Beast. It's not high art in any way, but but it is very fun. It's got great characters. I think that when they finally get to some of the more wackadoo ideas that they have in terms of Yetis and Bigfoot and everything like that, it is very compelling, and it just gets very wild, and I had a great time with it. And can't say that about every book I've read, so gotta give props to that. The next book, number 2, is a book that I just finished and I just read, Bigfoot, America's #1 Monster. Now, a lot of the reason why this is so high is because, look how short this is. This is like a super short book. It is 122 pages. It is just all about Bigfoot sightings, all about Bigfoot hoaxes, all about Bigfoot stories and legends, and everything is done in such a nice, condensed little package, and it is just super readable, super enjoyable, and I just had a great time with this. This obviously is not breaking any new ground. If you are a big fan of Bigfoot books and Bigfoot histories, this will not break new ground, but I just really like the way that it's presented. I like the way that it's all wrapped up in a little package, super readable, super addictive, and yeah, I had a great time with this. So, there you go. And surprising no one, my number 1 is The Spirit by Thomas Page, which is the Paperbacks from Hell book that was re-released by Valancourt. And that book is awesome. It's basically like, what if Bigfoot had a dog at one point? There's the Bigfoot has a dog. There's all these crazy ideas as far as to what the history of Bigfoots and Big Feet in America is. There is to what I think is not a terribly written indigenous character in this, which is very impressive considering that it was written in 1977. I don't remember anything particularly offensive about his portrayal, and his story is a lot more about the way that Vietnam ruined people, to put it bluntly. And he is kind of going up against this guy who is very unlikable. I don't like our protagonist in this book is kind of a dick. And that's kind of the point. It's this guy who's just like obsessed by like finding the indigenous person and finding the creature and like putting them down because they messed up with his friends. And he just gets very obsessed with trying to track this creature down. There is a lot of Bigfoot action in this. It's all written really, really well. It's really compelling. It's really fun. All the traditional covers of this book are bad, which is why when they reprinted it, Valancourt Books used the cover from Cold Front, I believe it's called. And yeah, so The Spirit by Thomas Page is my number one. Have you read any Bigfoot books? Do you like Bigfoot? Are you bored of Bigfoot? Do you not think there's anything that's worthwhile? Was there anything I didn't talk about in this that you think is worthy for a revisit? Thank you guys for watching. And as always, remember, it came from the page. Bye.